21 Convention, Tampa, Florida. We have a pretty, I'm going to say, legendary speaker here who started speaking at the 21 Convention in 2009. I actually was there to witness it, but as I was just telling him before, I actually saw more change in attendees directly coming from what he said and what he recommended than almost any other speaker, and that was impressive. That caught my ear and really made me start looking at my diet, how I exercised, and his philosophies of life. You can check him out at baye.com. That's B-A-Y-E. Let's bring on Drew Baye.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Now, the past couple times that I was at the 21 Convention, I talked about how to exercise. I want to do something a little bit different now since you've been hearing about how to exercise from a lot of other great speakers. Ellington Darden's going to be a little bit of a hard act to follow, but what I want to talk about is how to think about how to exercise. And this is important because the way you think about something is going to influence how you go about it. Now, if you attended Bill's presentation, I'm assuming he did biomechanics of exercise again, which is a phenomenal presentation. He taught you about how body positioning affects the moment arms that your muscles work against during exercise and how that can increase not only the difficulty of exercise but safety of exercise. Well, I'd like to take an example from that. If you were to take 100 people and hand them a barbell with no instruction at all and tell them to perform a curl, what you'll typically see is they'll stand holding the bar waist tight here, leaning forward slightly. They'll use a little bit of a hitch with the hips to swing it up, and as they come up, they're going to move their elbows forward in front of the hands in the barbell. Now, if you were paying attention during Bill's presentation, you know that you start with 0 moment arm, you go through the maximum moment arm, and then you end up with no moment arm at all. This is a great way to do a curl if your goal is to make the weight go up. It is a horrible way to do a curl if your goal is to effectively work your biceps. The difference between the two is that when you're thinking about making the bar go up, if you think of exercise as something that you do to the weights with your muscles, you're going to tend to move in a way that makes it easier to do that. But easier is not what you want during exercise. You want exercise to be demanding. Instead, you want to think of exercise as something you do to your muscles with the weights. Now, the difference between the way most curl, and I'll just use the curl as an example, and how you should curl, is that a proper curl is so much harder. You won't be able to lift as much weight, but it's going to be so much more effective for the muscle. And because you don't require as much weight, it also makes it a much safer exercise. I don't know if Bill went into specifics with moment arms and curling, but if you start here, it's easy. If you start with a slight backward lean and you've got the barbell a few inches in front of your elbow, it's a whole lot harder. If you end here, this is pretty easy. Again, it's a 0 moment arm. But if as you curl, you move your hips back, again, the barbell stays in front of the elbow. There's no difference in how far your elbow is moving, but there's a big difference in the average lever between this and doing this. And it's the same with a lot of other exercises. Now, the hard part about this is that when most people go into the gym, pick up a barbell or you get in a machine, we're conditioned to think about exercise as being, again, a process of doing something to the weights, doing something to the handles or the pedals or the pads on a machine. And again, when you think about exercise in that way, you're going to tend to move in a way that makes it easier to do that, which again is the exact opposite of what you want to do. If instead you think of the goal of the exercise as not doing work or not moving weights up and down, but rather on efficiently loading the muscles that you're targeting and doing so in a manner that avoids wrecking your joints in the process, you're going to tend to move in a manner that is more efficient for that purpose. Now, getting into the mindset I've found something that has made a huge difference in my workouts and workouts with clients is to take a few minutes before the workout to, first off, just empty out your thoughts, clear out, or actually quieting your mind is probably a better way of putting it. And then thinking about what you're going to be doing during the workout, mentally rehearsing the exercises. And as you are mentally rehearsing the exercises, it's important during that mental rehearsal to think about what you're really trying to accomplish. Again, you're not trying to make weights go up and down. You're not doing work to the machine or doing work to the barbell. In fact, the work you do is almost irrelevant, and I'll get to that in a moment. You are trying to place as much of a demand as possible on the muscles that you're using during the exercise. Now, something about work, I'll try and keep this tangent short. Elle talked about negative exercise. Now, if you are performing a curl, and again, we'll just use a curl as an example, you're doing work on the bar. Doing positive work, and although technically you're doing negative work, so the net is zero because you're back here, you're performing a certain amount of mechanical work. If you were to hold the same barbell in the mid-range position of a curl and do nothing with it, nothing at all, just hold it there, you wouldn't be performing mechanical work, but you would still be doing metabolic work, there would still be tension on the muscle, there would still be fatigue and inroad. You would still get benefit from that. So when doing the exercise, and again this leads back into the real objective, you don't want to concern yourself so much with how many repetitions you perform, but rather how you perform each of your repetitions. And you are going to get more results with much, much less risk of injury doing fewer repetitions in perfect form and keeping a lot of tension on the target muscles, even using a lighter weight, than if you were to use sloppy form to allow the use of a heavier weight and allow the use of more, or the performance of more repetitions. Now, another aspect of thinking about exercise that's important is differentiating between exercise as a stimulus rather than a producer of improvements. Exercise does not directly produce any improvements in the body. All of the improvements that happen as a result of exercise happen because your body is trying to respond to what it perceives as a negative thing, an extreme stress. And again, the stress that you're trying to create, the real goal being to do that. Now, the importance of thinking about it this way is that the exercise just being a stimulus doesn't directly produce the results. All it does is send a message to your body to produce those adaptations. For your body to be able to produce those adaptations, though, requires that you not do so much exercise that you utilize resources or energy that could have gone to recovery and adaptation, and that you give your body adequate time between workouts to be able to do that. Now, when people think of exercises, I go in the gym and I'm going to grow, it makes more sense for them to be in the gym more often, to do more sets, to do more exercises. But when you understand that exercise doesn't produce any improvements, all it is a stimulus, then it's easier to appreciate why exercise, if done correctly, also has to be relatively brief and relatively infrequent. And to expand a little bit on what Elle talked about, an example that I like to give to clients when I'm explaining how hard exercise needs to be effective is that throughout most of human history, we didn't have Nautilus machines, we didn't have barbells or any of that. If a person encountered some sort of a demanding physical stress, it was usually because they were either desperately trying to kill something for food, or they were trying desperately to avoid becoming something else's food. Now, if they happened to survive it, if they got the food and didn't starve, or if they managed to avoid becoming lunch for something else, then their body would respond to that stress by producing an improvement in strength so that the next time the same stress doesn't produce as much of an inroad and leave them unable to move afterwards. Now, so what we are doing in exercise is trying to replicate the general physical demands that would have stimulated improvements in our ancestors in the past, but without the same risks involved. What we are trying to do, in a nutshell, is to send a message to your body that its current capabilities are inadequate to meet some demand that the environment is placing on it, and that if it is going to survive another similar encounter, it has to get stronger. It has to improve its conditioning, all the other aspects of fitness that contribute to your ability to move. Again, training in this manner, focusing on making it that hard, runs completely counter to the way most people think going into the gym. One of the biggest hurdles is in getting people to train to momentary muscle failure, teaching them how hard they are capable of pushing themselves, and also teaching them that they are capable of working through discomfort. A lot of people assume, and this depends on the background. If you get somebody who spent their life in athletics, or somebody who grew up on a farm, or something where they are regularly performing hard physical work, they have a more realistic understanding of their capabilities than somebody who hasn't. But taking most people and starting them out, most people stop when exercise becomes uncomfortable because they assume, okay, it's becoming uncomfortable, the muscles are burning, I'm close to the end. They stop at that point. Or because they're not familiar with how hard they're capable of contracting, which is just a matter of inexperience. And an example of this, a lot of times with new clients, they'll get to a point where they don't think they can move the weight anymore. And 2 points on this. First off, a lot of times they quit when they get to that point. Not just because of the discomfort, but because it doesn't go. And again, they're thinking about making the weight go. It doesn't matter if the weight goes or not. They can still contract against it. They might not be able to move it, but they can still contract against it. And you want to do that. And the reason for that is when a lot of these people think they've reached momentary muscle failure, when they think they cannot continue the exercise in good form, I'll tell them, I'm going to assist you in performing another repetition or two. And then I pretend to, but I don't actually do it. I go through the motions of pretending to assist the movement of the barbell or pretending to apply force to the movement arm. And a lot of times these people are capable of getting 1, 2, 3 more repetitions than they thought they could because they believed that they were getting help. And because also somebody pushing them through that discomfort. Now, to be able to get the best possible results from exercise, and again, I think James talked about this, it is necessary to work with a very high intensity of effort. Working with a high intensity of effort requires that you push yourself through significant discomfort, not just muscular burning, but elevated heart rate, heavy breathing. And part of a mental block some people have about this is the fear that they are going to injure themselves or that they are going to pass out or something as a result of this. It's important to keep in mind that the injury during exercise has nothing to do with how hard you're training. And it doesn't even have anything to do with how much weight you're using, but rather the forces that are involved. And those forces are affected by a couple things. Again, I'm sure Bill touched on this, the levers and things like acceleration. As an example, if we were to go out in the parking lot right now and attempt to pick up somebody's truck, it's a ridiculous amount of weight. I don't think any of us are going to be able to stand under the bumper and deadlift it. But despite the fact that it's incredibly heavy, if you were to attempt to do so in a controlled manner, unless you had some sort of a pre-existing issue with your back or shoulders or hips, if you grabbed it and you gradually, you pulled lightly and then gradually pulled a little harder until you were pulling as hard as you could, and then you gradually eased off, you wouldn't injure yourself. You'd tire yourself out, you'd fatigue the muscles involved, but you would not be hurt in the process. On the other hand, if you grabbed the bumper and you yanked as hard and fast as you could, same weight, but the difference, the risk of injury, is that you were attempting to move in a very rapid manner. This comes back to, again, the idea of an exercise being about doing something to your muscles with the weight rather than about doing something to the weight with your muscles. If you are thinking of moving the truck, or even if it's just like a heavy barbell during the deadlift, and your focus is on making that weight go up, you're going to tend to do so in a manner that makes it easier to do that, which makes it less effective for the muscles. Again, if you focus instead on just trying to fatigue the muscles efficiently, you're going to tend to move in a way that does that. And that fatigue, counter to what most people assume, makes the exercise safer as it gets harder. Now, Elle talked about inroad. When you start an exercise, you have a certain number of units of strength. Suppose it's 100 units. And if you were to use 80% of that, it would require 80 units of that strength to be able to move that weight. Now, with every repetition, you're going to fatigue a little bit, so that the amount of force you can produce gradually goes down until it's 80 units, at which point you're contracting as hard as you possibly can. Now, a lot of people believe that going to this point causes an injury. The exact opposite is true if you maintain correct body positioning and movement, and if you're not trying to, again, if you're focusing on efficiently loading the muscles and not just trying to move the weight. And here's why. Now, suppose that you're using 80% of your one repetition maximum. If you get 80%, make sure this thing doesn't tip here, you already have a 20% difference between that and what your maximum is. Now, your one repetition maximum is considerably lower than what you are capable of lowering under control. Most people, about 30-40% more weight, that you can lower about 30 to 40% more weight under control than you can lift. So we get another 140% here. So the total safety margin between these, about 60%. So at the beginning of an exercise, when you're capable of producing 100 pounds of force, you're capable of producing more force. You're more capable of causing an injury if you attempt to accelerate rapidly, if you're bouncing, jerking, yanking the weight. But as you fatigue and as the amount of force that you can produce goes down, the difference, and the amount of force required to cause an injury would be a little higher than that. The difference between the force that you are capable of producing and the force required to produce an injury goes down as you fatigue. So as discomfort increases, as your muscles start to burn, your heart's pounding, you're breathing heavy, and every fiber is just screaming at you to stop the exercise, as you are getting it deep into that territory, rather than increasing your risk of injury during exercise, as long as you maintain strict form, you are actually making it safer. Now, how do you do that, though? How do you get to that point? Well, by keeping in mind that whatever the discomfort is, that it is not an actual indicator of an injury occurring. It might suck, it might hurt, and that it's very, very uncomfortable, but no damage, not on a macro level, is being caused to the body while you're doing this. Regardless of how it feels, it would be what's considered non-informative pain. It's not sending a message to you that something is being injured or something is about to be injured. It's your body's response to the stress, fatigue that's produced during the exercise. It's temporary. When you get through it, shortly after the workout, and sometimes it'll linger a little bit, it'll be gone. Now, you have to ask yourself as you're going through the exercise, and you start to think about, and everybody, I do this. I've been doing this, training this way for 20 years, and I still catch myself doing it, and I have to fight it. You get to that point where it just becomes incredibly uncomfortable. You're sucking wind, your thighs or whatever are just burning because of the exercise. You have to, again, in a mindset, you have to think to yourself at that point, is the temporary relief from this discomfort more important to me than the long-term goals of doing this to begin with? And that seems to help most people to be able to push through that. But you gotta have a couple things. You have to have both an understanding that you're not going to wreck yourself in the process, because if people think that they're going to become injured, well, it's sane to stop if you think you're going to injure yourself. Again, if you're using strict form, you're not going to do so. Even, again, with the truck example, even with a heavy weight, it's not how much weight you're using, but rather how you are attempting to move it. great example of this, and I'm sure another one that Bill has covered is the barbell squat. The barbell squat, when done correctly, is a safe exercise for some people. The problem is that almost nobody does the exercise correctly. And it is because when most people squat, they're attempting to move as much weight as possible rather than trying to use the weight to efficiently load the muscles of the hips and thighs. Now, if you do it the way that most people do it, you are capable of using a weight that, Bill, did you talk about the spine as a pyramid? You are capable of using a weight that is going to wreck your spine. Now, if you watch how most people squat, they'll drop down, a lot of times not even halfway, bounce back up, rest at the top. That bounce at the bottom is part of the problem. Part of the problem, though, is that if you go from here to here, the average lever that you're counting is much smaller than if you go from here all the way down. Because you've got a smaller average lever in this part of the exercise, you're capable of using much, much more weight, an amount that can place a tremendous amount of force in the spine. Now, also reversing direction too quickly at the bottom is a problem. It makes it easier to make the heavy weight go up, but because it allows you to use a heavier weight, it also makes it much, much more dangerous. If you're holding a weight perfectly motionless, if you got 100 pounds and you're holding it motionless, you're not lifting it, you're not letting it down, you're producing 100 pounds of force at the point of contact with that barbell to keep it still. If it's at steady state, there's no difference between the force you're producing and the pull of gravity. If you're moving at a constant velocity, if it's a 100-pound barbell, you're producing 100 pounds of force. When that force changes is when you have to accelerate negatively to slow the weight down to a stop, and then again positively as you attempt to move it again. If you were to take a very heavy weight and lower it slowly, and as you approach the bottom, gradually slow to a stop, and then very gradually begin to lift it, the difference between the amount of force that you have to produce and the amount that's on the bar is only going to be a few percent. If you're lowering a 100-pound barbell, as you approach the bottom, you're going relatively slowly, gradually slow to a stop. To be able to gradually slow it to a stop, you'll have to produce a few more pounds of force. Then you'll have to produce a few more pounds of force to gradually start it again. On the other hand, if you drop it and come to a sudden stop, usually at the end point of the joint's range of motion, and then bounce it back up, the difference in force between what's on the bar and what your tissues involved are encountering is significant. So again, coming back to the idea that you're not trying to do something to the weight with your muscles, you're trying to do something to your muscles with the weight. You forget about the weight, forget about how much weight you're using, focus on how you're using it to place as much demand as possible on the muscles. Now back to the squat. I've had people who can squat 300, 400 some pounds in typical fashion fail after 8 or 9 body weight squats when done in a manner that increases the average lever and that manipulates the timing so more time is spent at the position where the average lever is higher. For example, basically it's the exact opposite of how most people squat. You see most people squat, it's this kind of a thing. I have people go all the way down so that tops of their thighs are just a little bit below the knees. Hold this position for a few seconds. And after holding this position for a few seconds, I tell them to start so slowly that somebody watching would have a hard time telling at which point they started, almost like they're trying to sneak out of the start point. And they get up to about here and I stop them. I tell them to go back down from there. Now this is about as low as most people go. This is about as high as I let them go, and then back down. Now, I've done this a bit, so I can do it while talking. A lot of people are losing their breath at this point. This makes a huge, huge difference, that pause in the bottom and that slow start. It's the exact opposite of what you see most people doing with a barbell on their back during the gym. If you do a squat in that manner, if you're focusing not on trying to make weight go up and down, but on trying to place as much of a demand as possible on those muscles, most people will not be able to use anywhere near the amount of weight that they can use for a squat in typical form. So everything Bill said about the squat, absolutely 100% correct. For most people, it is a dangerous exercise for the back, but that's because of the way that most people perform it. If you do it similarly to the manner that I just described, you won't be capable of using much weight. Again, I've had people who could squat now I'm starting to feel it, 400 something pounds for reps that failed after about 8 or 9 of those. Again, the difference, it all comes back to when you are going through a workout, keeping the real goal in mind. And that's not just effectively stimulating improvements in the muscles that you're targeting, but also doing it without wrecking your joints in the process. Now, let me grab it right here. So any questions? Oh, I guess we gotta wait for the, waiting for whoever's got the microphone.
Thanks, Drew. That was a great presentation. When I started Body by Science, that was like one of the hardest things to wrap my head around because I've been doing weights with the whole, sets and reps model for so long. Hey, Drew, great presentation.
Thank you.
When I first read Body by Science, that was one of the biggest things to wrap my head around because I've been doing the sets and reps model for so long that learning to think about it in terms of loading your muscles was a big shift. There's still a couple of places where I have trouble. Doing legs past the discomfort zone is extremely difficult. But since you mentioned that some of your clients say they can't do anymore, but you get 3 more reps out of them, like how do I know for sure that I've reached failure?
What I tell people to do when they're training on their own, when they don't have somebody there to assist them with forced reps, which I use as more of a teaching tool than anything else, I tell them that they want to go to the point where they can't continue in good form, and when they get to that point, even if they're absolutely certain there's no way that they can move the weight, they should continue to contract against it for a few seconds. And while they're doing that, they should gradually attempt to contract harder. If after about 5 seconds or so, it still doesn't move, then you don't just set the weight down. You still, depending on where you reach momentary muscle failure, if it's in the mid-range or close to the end point of the exercise, you still want to take your time lowering the weight. But by spending a few seconds after reaching that point, gradually, you don't want to shift your body around, you don't want to do anything to cheat the weight up. Again, the goal isn't to make the weight go, it's to fatigue the muscles, but to know that you've gotten to that point, it helps to gradually try to squeeze a little bit harder for a few seconds. If after a few seconds it doesn't go, it's probably not going to go. But also, by doing that on a consistent basis, I think that people learn to contract harder over time. Unfortunately, and one of the most frustrating things when talking about high-intensity training without actually being able to put somebody through a workout is that intensity of effort is very much it's one of those things that unless you have experienced it, unless you have been put through a workout by somebody who knows how to push you and get as much work out of you as possible, it is difficult for most people to relate to what they are capable of. When I started training this way, I thought I was training hard. And I was pushing to what I thought was momentary muscle failure. I thought I was maintaining a pretty good pace during my workouts. But around 1994, I started working for a guy named Mike Moran, who was a phone client of the bodybuilder Mike Mentzer. And we had talked. I was training people at another gym. Their gym was closer to the college, and it just turned out that they were also doing a high-intensity training, so it was a good fit. And he said that he was going to put me through a workout. And it was what I had previously thought of as a 10, on a scale of 1 to 10 with intensity of effort, became about a 2 or a 3 after that workout. And we've done the same to a lot of people since then. One of the also frustrating things is The high-intensity training program that we had there was derided by a lot of the bodybuilders that worked out there. They thought that was no possible way it could work. That's too easy. Just only lifting for 20-something minutes. Occasionally, we would convince some of them to let us put them through a workout, and this result is typical. I had a guy, and he was supposed to do deadlift, leg press, pull down, chest press, row, shoulder press, heel raise, just a circuit of hammer strength machines. We got as far as the compound row, and he asked to be excused. He said he needed to go to the locker room. I didn't see him for another 2 hours. He had gone in there, thrown up, and then lain down and just fell asleep on the floor. When I saw him again, he was sitting in the front lobby, pale as a ghost. Now, this is a guy who's a fair-skinned redhead, so he was already relatively pale. He was even paler. He looked like he was in shock. And asked him if it was okay. He said, yeah, his girlfriend was going to come pick him up to drive him home because he didn't think that he would be okay to drive. We didn't see him again for about a week. And when he came back, he was doing the same stuff that he had been doing previously. And I asked him, well, why are you back doing this? He said, well, your way is too hard. So, and then these were people who were working out. Well, it's really, really difficult thing to get across in words or in writing, even in videos. It's difficult unless you can experience it yourself. Now, it helps to have a good trainer. Unfortunately, while personal trainers are a dime a dozen, you can walk into any busy area, throw a rock in one direction, you'll probably hit one. Trainers that have any idea what they're doing are extremely hard to find. You would be better off finding somebody that was equally motivated as you to improve and to partner with them during your workouts and push each other than you would going to most trainers, because most personal trainers will at best waste a whole lot of your time and money, and at worst probably injure you, or at the very least overtrain you. So it's, again, I would recommend when you think you've reached the point of momentary muscle failure to continue contracting for a few seconds. Again, keep in mind your goal isn't to make the weight go. Your goal is to try and fatigue those muscles as deeply as you can. If after a few seconds it doesn't go, then you just want to stop at that point. Now, if you do have a training partner, I would have them occasionally, and it's important that this be occasionally assist you with a forced repetition. And when they do so, they should do so while applying as little assistance as necessary for you to just barely continue. Now, the reason I say it should be occasional is because if you are doing forced reps on a regular basis, if every time you do an exercise, you know that your training partner is going to give you 2 or 3 forced repetitions, you're going to tend to hold back a little bit in reserve of that in anticipation of having to do that continued work. So it should be kind of a surprise thing. You should not know that you're going to do it until you're doing it, just to prevent thinking about having to hold back. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Any other questions?
What would you advise to someone who just has weights at home?
Just has weights at home? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a rack or just the weights?
Just the weights. So.
If you have just weights at home, what I would recommend for a basic routine, actually before I go into any program, almost anything that is done hard and progressively, that addresses all the major muscle groups and has a volume and frequency that is appropriate to you, is going to produce good results. Doesn't matter if you're using machines, doesn't matter if you're using free weights, doesn't matter if you're using body weight. How you use them is far more important than the tool you use. Proper use of primitive tools is going to give you much better results, much more safely than improper use of the best equipment in the world. Again, Bill probably covered all this in more detail than most people can hold on to, so pick up his book. That will give you a good idea of how you can do this with the free weights. But now what I would recommend, if you've just got free weights at home, is you want to be able to cover all the major muscle groups. Minimally, you want pushing and pulling movements in horizontal and vertical planes, and you want to do some type of a squatting or leg pressing movement. You want to do some type of a hip hinging movement. That covers almost all the major muscle groups right there. To that, you could add a neck extension and flexion for the neck, which doesn't get that much work during the other exercises, unless you're doing push-ups and inverted rows where your body's horizontal and the muscles are working to maintain head position. And I would also add calf raises to that and direct grip work if you find that your grip is a limiting factor on these other exercises. But with nothing but, is it barbells or dumbbells? With nothing but a barbell, you could perform, and I would start with body weight squats, again, in the manner that I described, or using L's 30-30-30, but not starting from the top. I would start from about the halfway point. So either body weight squats starting from the halfway point for legs, or, and you could alternate this with a deadlift. For the upper body pushing movement, do you have a bench? Okay, push-ups. And push-ups done correctly can be made as hard as you need them to be. For the arms, rowing. Now, I recommend, if you don't have something to support the chest on, doing the rows one arm at a time. If you've got, if you don't have a bench, you can do a one-armed row, bracing yourself on your knee. Oh, wait, oh, you got barbells, that's right. With a barbell, I'm not as much of a fan as bent over barbell rows as dumbbell rows. Reason being, if you are doing a barbell row, holding yourself in this position, after a while, depending on what you've already done for the glutes and hamstrings, you start to focus more on just trying to maintain back position than pulling the bar. It's a little bit easier to do if you've got a dumbbell where you can be supported. But with a barbell, with the rows, you could do the same thing, but I would recommend limiting the range of motion to the top half to make the exercise harder so that you don't require as much weight, so that it's less difficult for the muscles of the glutes and hamstrings and low back to maintain that. For the shoulders, overhead pressing. And Bill, did you talk about shoulder angle and the glenoid fossa and avoiding, okay. If you're gonna do an overhead press, and correct me if I'm off on this, Bill, people like to categorize exercises in terms of front, back, side, but 90-degree angles don't always work out so well in certain movements. And if you're doing a shoulder movement, you don't want to have your arms way back here going up and down. You want to have the elbows in a little bit. Anyways, I'm going off topic on this, but you want to do a standing press with a barbell for the shoulders. We'll cover that. Now, the only thing that's really difficult to get without some sort of a chinning bar or pull-down machine is that vertical pulling movement. What I would recommend is getting a chin-up bar. And ideally, you want something, and what I'm going to recommend for a chin-up bar is that it be installed at a height that you can reach it without having to jump. You should be able to reach it flat-footed. And the reason for this is, if you have to jump, you're not going to be able to grip it as precisely. You're not going to, also, as soon as you catch it, you're suddenly loading up the shoulders. Instead, what you want to do is be able to grab the bar and then very gradually transfer the weight from your feet to your arms so that you're not suddenly loading them up. So if you've already got barbell, you can do pretty much everything that you need with that, but I would recommend adding a chin-up bar to that for that vertical pulling movement. Any other questions?
All right, let's give it up, guys. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.